thank you so much for coming out on this very rainy night. Sheila Weinberg, I'm the founder and CEO of the Institute for Truth in Accounting. I'm a CPA, so I do have an accounting background. I'll start off by telling you why I formed the Institute. I formed it around the 2000 presidential election. If you'll remember back then, it was before 9/11, we had surpluses projected as far as the eye could see. Remember those good old days? But unfortunately, I had studied the federal budget, and the reason I did was because they were projecting surpluses, but the debt was going up at the same time. And I'm like, you can't have surpluses and have debt go up. Even if you're not an accountant, I hope you can understand. Those two are mutually exclusive. So, and you remember at that point in time, it was during the election, so Bush was going around saying, I'm going to return this surplus in the form of a tax cut to the American people. And Gore was going around and saying, I'm going to put Social Security in, remember, the lockbox. I'm going to take the surplus and put it in the lockbox. And I am in essence shaking my TV every night saying there isn't a surplus. Because I had gone through the 183 federal budget and realized that any of that surplus was money that we were actually borrowing from the American people. We were supposed to be, it would be like a bank. I've taken your money, I'm holding it until you retire, and then I'm going to return it back to you. Well, they were recording that money as revenue instead of recording it as a trust or, in essence, a loan. You were loaning them their money. And also, if you handled Social Security, there's a study done by Hal Jackson at Harvard University. If you handled Social Security like a pension at that point in time in 2000, as a corporation is required to handle a pension, we were not running a surplus. That program alone was running a $500 billion deficit at that point in time. So the election happened, and I'm like, let me see. The federal government is the largest financial organization in the world, and we just elected the leader of that based on fuzzy math. And I felt that the American public did not have the information they needed to make a knowledgeable decision about their governments because we weren't being told the truth. Thus, my mission to get truth in accounting. And and they continue, this isn't something that just happened in 2000, they continue to tell you lies. So for example, does anybody know how much the debt ceiling, what number were they going to raise the debt ceiling to? It's 17 trillion. 17. Yeah. No, now. Yeah, now. Now they're debating on $17 trillion. But that is not the real debt number. To understand the real debt number, I'll just ask you a couple questions. Do you believe that our veterans are owed the retirement benefits that they have been promised?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Do you believe our seniors are owed the retirement benefits that they have been promised?
Yeah.
Neither of those liabilities are in that $17 trillion. If you added those liabilities, the real debt, not 17 trillion, is $74 trillion. Okay. And to give you an idea of how much that is, Julie, did you ask them to bring their checkbooks tonight? No. Okay, because I hope, oh, you did. Okay, since she forgot that part. When you get home, just write a check to Treasury for $237,000. and send it to the Treasury Department. And if you're married, add another $237,000 for your wife. And if you have any children, add another $237,000 for each one of them. And if every single American in the United States did that, then we would have the money we need to pay our current liabilities. And back to starting the Institute and why I started is that, again, we weren't informed. Next slide, please. And so this is a great quote from Thomas Jefferson. An informed electorate is the basis of a sound democracy. So I ask you, what type of government do you get if the electorate is misinformed? Next slide, please. And that would be the state of Illinois. Okay? In the state of Illinois, we have a constitutional requirement to balance our budget. So therefore, we should not be going into financial troubles. We should not have debt. Next slide, please. The reason that we have that requirement, like 48 other states have, only Vermont does not have a balanced budget, is, Steve, why don't you read this slide? We don't need to listen to me the whole time.
A great one, because I agree with it wholeheartedly. Politicians should not have the pleasure of spending, getting votes, without the pain of taxing or losing votes.
Yeah, and that's how you hold your elected officials accountable, is by having this balance. And honestly, in Illinois, we're getting a lot more government, and I know you're going to hate me to hear it say this, than we're paying for. We've gotten tons of more government than we're paying for. So I know this budgeting and stuff is confusing, and I'm gonna relate stuff to the state of Illinois, and then we're gonna bring it back to Elgin. Honestly, the state is worse than Elgin, so we have better material there. Let's go to the next slide. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna ask us some personal questions, not like personal, and then we'll relate those back to the state. So Jim, why don't you read us the first question?
If you had to take out a loan to pay your current bills, would you consider your budget balanced?
Okay. These aren't hard questions, just so you know, and they're not trick questions. Next slide, please. Tony.
At the beginning of the year, your credit card balances totaled $14,600. At the end of the year, your credit card balances increased to $19,400. Are you reaching your balanced budget goal? No.
Okay, next question. Would you mind reading it? Yeah.
You hire someone to do work around your house. You don't have enough money to pay their bill in full. You promise to pay them the rest next year. Would you consider your budget balanced? No.
And the next question? Oh, next slide if we didn't go there. Okay.
For years, you have hired people to do your work around your house. Every year, you haven't had enough money to pay them in full. Each year, you had to tell them your children will pay the rest when they grow up. Have past budgets been truly balanced? No.
All right, so let's go to the state questions. Sir, the first state question.
The state of Illinois had $5 billion of debt in 1984. Since that time, the state's budget has been balanced. Based upon these facts, how much debt does the state have now?
So if they, well, let's go back. Jim said we should have no debt because a balanced budget, as I mentioned, your revenues should equal your expenses, and you should not be going into debt. You could have capital improvement debts, but in our calculations, we don't include those. So despite this balanced budget requirement, next slide, the state of Illinois is $169.1 billion short. Does that say billions? We have this $169 billion shortfall. Let's go to the next slide. Sir.
Sorry.
If the state has to take out loans to pay its current bills, would you consider its budget balanced?
Okay. Is that a duplicate of the slide that you had, Jim? Okay, sorry, we got two slides there. Well, in the 2012 budget and in prior budgets, the governor included $1.4 billion of loan proceeds to balance the budget. You, in essence, recorded those as revenues. So the question is, how in the heck how could he record loan proceeds as revenues and still say that the budget is balanced? Next slide, please. Okay, we're here. So what it is this is the constitutional requirement, and it has a lot of words, but in essence, what it is saying is that your funds available have to equal your expenditures. So, if you borrow money, does that not become available? So that's how they balance the budget, by borrowing money. Next slide, please. Sir. See, you thought you sit in the back and you wouldn't get picked on, but yeah, no, sorry.
At the beginning of the year, the state's unpaid bills totaled $1.9 billion. At the end of the year, the state's unpaid bills increased to $4.6 billion. Is the state meeting the budget, the balanced budget requirement?
What do you think?
I'm not going to answer.
He refuses to answer. He's going to be a good politician. Okay, remember the definition was our funds available have to equal our expenditures. Okay? Notice they did not use the word expenses. They used expenditures. So in essence, what the state of Illinois and most state and local governments are doing is they are using checkbook accounting. So if you don't write a check for it, it doesn't have to be included in this balanced budget requirement. So the state of Illinois increased their unpaid bills, and was still able to claim a balanced budget because they didn't write the check for those bills. In essence, what they do is they hide the bills in the drawers of agencies. Because what happens is when the bill goes to Judy Bar Topeka, the comptroller, to get paid, it starts earning interest. But if I don't forward it to her, it does not start start charging interest on it. And again, if she doesn't write the check for it, I don't have to include it in my balanced budget requirement. And this type of accounting is so unreliable that the IRS does not allow a corporation that has revenues of $5 million to do their accounting this way. But the state and local governments who have far, the state government is between about $30 billion. Next question, sir. Can you read it from back there?
They delay paying vendor bills.
Oh, no, that should be on there. Next slide. Sorry. Yes, there we are.
State has thousands of employees. Each year, the state does not have enough money to pay the employees total compensation. The employees are promised to be paid in the future. Do you consider the state's budget balanced?
No. All right. And then we'll quickly slip. Well, the state has. No, we'll do that. We'll do that following. The next question, please. This will be the final question. Keith, why don't you read the final question?
For decades, the state has not had enough money to pay the employees' total compensation. The employees have been promised retirement benefits that will have to be paid by future taxpayers. Have past budgets been truly balanced?
No. Okay. Remember, this goes back to the expenditure thing. Okay. So if I promise the employees benefits, if I don't fund those benefits, if I don't write a check to the pension fund to fund those benefits, that part of the compensation does not have to be included in the balanced budget calculation. Compensation is not just the salaries. It is your salaries, your health care benefits you get, and your retiree health care benefits you get. And the employees every single year earn the right to receive those benefits. They incur the expense. The government doesn't record, but actually a liability is created. They owe the employees these benefits. And so that part of the compensation should also be included in the balanced budget requirement, but it's not. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't have these type of plans. I'm just saying if you have them, then you need to include the true cost in the budget, and you need to fund them because these people are relying on them. And I forgot the other point I was going to make. Oh, okay, I remember. Okay, so, and what happened here is the elected officials, they are pretty, believe it or not, they are kind of smart down there. They use this great accounting method that I call political math, And what they figured out is they had the employees coming to them and saying, we want more, just like, I'm working hard, I want more. Well, if I go ahead and I increase their salaries, then their paychecks are going to increase. And then that nasty balanced budget requirement is going to get in the way. So instead of doing that, I go ahead and I just promise these benefits. And the employees are happy. None of it, I'm not writing a check for it. So none of the amount doesn't have to be included in the balanced budget requirement calculation. I get reelected. If I didn't do this and I increase their paychecks, then we'd have to meet that balanced budget requirement, we would have to either cut taxes, raise taxes, or cut elsewhere, and I don't like those options because my electorate might not like those options. So, go to the next slide. Oh, I know. We can hand out the state of Illinois thing right now. Somehow the state of Illinois thing did not get in here. Do you have the state of Illinois?
I didn't have the state of Illinois, I only had the state of Elgin, I apologize.
Oh, that's all right, that's okay. That's all right. Well, we mentioned that there are $169 billion. I got confused, I didn't ask Julie to do that. There are $169 billion. Now, the state, as you can tell, is really good at doing this accounting and this budgeting and all of that. So they dictate to the cities how they should do their accounting and budgeting, okay? And how they should do their pensions. So the cities, including Elgin, have a balanced budget requirement. And, again, that means the revenues should equal the expenses over time, and we should not be in any debt. The next slide will show us how far in debt I hope we got. So the city of Elgin, I am not including any capital assets, and I'm not including any debt related to those capital assets, because you shouldn't sell, hopefully, Skyway not included, or parking meters not included. You shouldn't sell those type of assets to pay for your current bills, so we do not include those. Since we take the assets out, we also take the related debt. So the city of Elgin has $277 million of bills and $227 million. So you are 50.5, you have a shortfall of 5.
What kind of assets are they?
Cash, investments, things like that. So relative to other governments, honestly, you're not in that bad a shape. Obviously, if you're balancing your budget, the number should be 0. It works out to be about $1,400 per household. So it's not like the federal government where we're talking $237,000. The state of Illinois' number is $34,800. So this isn't bad. Anybody live live in McCook, village of McCook?
I know where you're going.
Okay, village of McCook. Their per household number is more than $300,000.
Is that a town?
It's a little village. They don't have that many households because it's kind of industrial, so we'll give them that benefit of the doubt. But their debt is so high because they did a deal to build, I think it was a soccer stadium.
That's Bridgeview.
Is that Bridgeview? It was what did they build out there? They built something.
They had some huge industrial park and they threw a bunch of money. Isn't that what they did in the truck?
Yeah.
Because it's Bridgeview that has Toyota Park.
Oh, okay.
Where they have repeatedly borrowed. In Bridgeview, they have been borrowing money to pay back borrowed money.
Yeah. And what they did is they borrowed money and then they in essence gave it to a developer and said develop something for us. They did not keep control of the assets, so they don't own the stuff that the developer built. They have half of that is pensions and all that. So now the question here is, I'm telling you that the city is 50.5 million shortfall. What is the city telling you? If we can do next slide, I hope it's there, we'll find out. The city, in a Daily Herald story, which I'm not saying the Daily Herald story is wrong, I'm saying it's right, said that the city intends to use the 2013 end of the year surplus of $9.95 million as working capital to carry over to balance future budgets. Okay, so they're telling you, again, this is like, the real number is that they're in the hole. They're telling you that they have a surplus.
Is the 50 million mostly in retirement?
Yes, yes, we'll get to that. The next, what's the next thing that they're, the other thing they said in November? Yes, thank you. So again, they're talking about a working class, okay, and I think this might be where you guys might be involved. The council members also spent time Wednesday discussing the city's working cash flow carryover of $6.93 million targeted by some Elgin residents as a surplus that should be returned to the taxpayers. Now, if you have a surplus, you know, you do have to make a decision on what to do with it. You know, do you use it for more government, or do you return it to, if you have a true surplus, or do you return it to the taxpayers? But you don't have a surplus, so we shouldn't be having that discussion because there isn't a surplus. And my analysis, I did go ahead and I did, you guys have a 2012 analysis of the state, which shows the 50.5 million. I also did one as of 2011. Say, okay, where were we at 2011 and where are we now? So, and what was the net change? So in 2011, your shortfall was, I hate to use the word only, was only $40.6 million. So in 1 year, even though we had a balanced budget, your debt went up by almost $10 million. Now, as Jim mentioned, most of this is related to the pensions and retiree health care benefits. On the flip side of your thing, and this next slide will show you what those are. You can see the police pension fund, which is, they only have 43 cents to pay every dollar that they've been promised in the police pension fund. A very shocking number, besides the number in its entirety, is that last column. The unfunded liability as a share of covered payroll. And what that means is, how long, if we went ahead, in this case, if we went ahead and we laid off all of the policemen for 5 years, and we diverted that money into the pension fund, then we would be caught up in the pension fund for the police. And it's almost as bad for the firefighters. So, now the village, I mean the city, we have villages where I'm from. And again, you're supposed to, how do I describe, I was going to do a magic marker thing, but since you guys are so far away. So, please forgive me, I don't think I'm going to lose you on this, but let me know if I lose you and we'll go back. So, let's pretend that you are $30,000 in debt, okay? And you have a credit card or a note, let's just do a note, a non-interest bearing note of $30,000, okay? And you decide, I don't want to have that anymore, so I'm going to pay that off over 30 months. So it's non-interest bearing, so I'm going to pay $1,000 every single month. Have I lost you yet? Oh, good. But I also incur other costs that are related to that. So it's like your credit card. So I have this balance, I'm going to pay a little bit off, but I also keep on charging for my shoes. So I'm also going to pay that off. I'm not going to keep on accumulating this. And that's the plan the city has, is it says, over a 30-year period, we have a balance, but we're going to slowly pay that off to get to zero by the time the 30 years is over. But for some reason, their plan is not working. The next slide, please. Because in 2007, the unfunded pension promises were $70 million. And remember, they have this plan to pay it off. But somehow it gets up to $157 million.
And this is Elgin.
This
still.
is Elgin. This is Elgin. So something must have happened. They work with actuaries to try to figure out the amount that they're supposed to pay off. You might say, well, did they enhance your benefits? They did not enhance the benefits. In 1 year, look at the number between 11 and 12. In 1 year, it went up by 24 million dollars. This unfunded liability in just 1 year. So somehow, instead of paying this off, they're actually increasing it year after year. Elgin is not alone. Most governments are doing this, but they should be. Their goal is to pay it off. Next slide, please. Okay. So the big problem here at Elgin is the pensions. Okay, and again, I'm not saying you shouldn't have them, but if you have them, you should properly account for them. You should include them in your balanced budget, and you should fund them. Okay. But they don't do that. So in the 2013 budget, the Daily Herald reported correctly, I am sure, that they're going to recommend that they hire a new employee because it's going to cost less than having an outside person. Okay? Number one, I would not add employees. We already have enough trouble with these pensions. Number two, when they did this is where this truth in accounting gets back. When they did this calculation on whether the employee is going to cost less or cost more, okay, is it costing less if we do it outside versus costing more? Did they also did they also include the employee's pension and retiree health care benefits?
Well, this goes even beyond that. I've covered governments, and they don't consider the added workers' compensation premiums. They don't consider the added unemployment benefits. They don't include the paid time off, the sick time off, all that stuff.
Do they include current health care costs?
They don't include the health care costs. They don't include the pension costs. They don't include the workers' comp costs. They don't include the unemployment costs. And you just go right down the list. I've seen this time and time again.
Yeah, so again, you're making a recommendation that the board is making a recommendation that we should hire, or somebody on the staff maybe, we should hire a new employee, but they're not using truthful information.
Yeah,
well, they may not be.
And sometimes I've seen it too, where they will say, well, that does include the pension, but it still doesn't include the workers' comp and the unemployment and all that stuff, because there are all kinds of benefits beyond the health insurance and the pensions.
So the question is, what can you do? In Elgin, as I pointed out, I did not find evidence that they are borrowing money to balance the budget. I did not find, they may be, but I could not find evidence of that. I didn't find where they're not paying non-pension payroll. They're not hiding the bills like they do in the state of Illinois. But I did find this pension problem. And can we go back to this slide on the increase?
Yep.
And this is your problem. You need to figure out why in the heck is this going up. Ask your elected officials, why is this going up if your plan is to pay it off? So therefore it should be going down. And why would your unfunded pensions go up by $24 million in 1 year when you didn't have benefit enhancements? They did play with the rate of return. They did it they went from, instead of pretending that they're going to earn 8% on their rate of their investments, they're now pretending they're going to earn 7.75%.
Which is still a fantasy.
That's not going to account for your $25 million. Yes, Julie?
Do you know what the nominal rate is right now on average return for these kind of funds?
Depends on how long you go for it. GAO did a study, it was like 4 or 5%.
That's what I've heard.
And, and let's just pretend, if they can get 7.75, sign me up. I'm going to give them my money because I'm not getting that anywhere else. So some people would say, well, you should go ahead and lower that assumption. You should not pretend you're earning that much money because that was the old economy. The new economy, we're not going to earn that amount of money. But what they do is they say we earn 8% over a long period of time. Okay, so in 1 year I'm going to earn 11, hopefully 12%. When the economy was doing good, I'm going to earn 12%. When the economy, it's going to be 5%, and overall it's a flat 8%. And so what happens with the funds is you should be contributing a constant amount. If you're paying what you should be paying in, you should be contributing a constant amount no matter what happens, because you're pretending it earns 8%. But what happens is when things go good, and in the 90s and the mid-2000s, when things were going well, they saw that the plans were getting, quote, too much money in them. Okay? And so they reduced the contributions, or they gave people more benefits. So this 8%, even if you pretend you earn 8%, it becomes it's not a good planning, because when I go to villages, I say, they're like, well, hello, the market hit me. We were doing fine until the market hit. Well, no, it goes up and down. So you were before the market hit, you actually should have been way overfunded. And they weren't, because it's like, we have extra money, we don't need to overfund. Jim, you had a question. Oh, he might have forgotten the question.
I almost forgot, yeah. I kind of forget what's all on a real estate tax, but isn't the pension amounts, or, I don't know.
Are you in Cook County?
Kane.
Kane County. I know in Cook County they are, I'm not sure.
I know there's pensions on there, but I guess I'm saying, was that money collected, then put into the general revenue? I mean, it's not set aside then?
No, it's set aside. They're just not setting it
Not
up.
necessarily. My local newspaper this week in McHenry County had a big story. The Village of Island Lake has exactly what you described. They have a tax that is specifically designated for pensions, right? They took more than $200,000 over their last year of money that was collected, and it says right on your tax bill, here's what you paid for pensions. And they put it into the general fund.
Yeah.
They did not want to make any sort of hard budget choices, so they robbed in the Village of Island Lake. We just learned this week, they robbed from their own pensions, and to me, it's flat out fraud, because your tax bill said right on there, here's how much you paid for pensions. They took $200,000 of that and spent.
Well, that's not different than the state. I mean,
Oh, no.
they rolled it in.
And if a private business were to do that, there would be criminal charges.
Well, that's for sure, yeah.
Yes.
But it doesn't happen in government.
Yes. And I would contend that it doesn't happen in government because we're not paying for it. Right now, here in Illinois, we are getting government that costs this much. We're only paying this much. So you ask, why do things not change? We're getting a good deal, okay? If we had to raise taxes to cover the true cost of government, then people would go, well, hold it, why are we paying so much in taxes? A great example would be, two examples, and I apologize if I offend any liberal people here. Two examples would be, one, the Affordable Care Act, okay, and the Tea Party. One of the major reasons that the Tea Party was formed was because that bill includes extra taxes. Okay? The prescription drug bill that Bush and the Republicans pushed through, that added $8 trillion to the unfunded liability. Okay? Now, was there any uproar about that? No, because they didn't charge any taxes for it. Until it hits your pocketbook, it's not going to really, and now let's look at the prescription drug bill, and you know, if you go to the American public, and what they did is they went to the American public and said, oh my God, these prescription costs for our seniors are going up astronomically. And then they had, you know, this woman is eating dog food in order to pay for, now we're a compassionate country. We're not going to go make her eat dog food to pay for her prescriptions. So we said, okay, let's do a prescription drug bill. It wasn't until 2.5 months after that bill passed that they finally calculated how much that piece of legislation added to the unfunded liabilities. And it was $8 trillion. $25,000 for every man, woman, and child in the country.
Yeah, and it was the first major entitlement that had no funding source designated for it. Even Social Security, Medicare, there is a Social Security tax. There's a Medicare tax. It's not nearly enough to pay for it, but there at least is a tax that says, okay, this money's going for Social Security, this money's going for Medicare. There's nothing designated for that spending.
So if you went to the American people and you said,
Is that $8 trillion for 1 year or over a length of time?
it's what the promises that were made at that point in time that were not funded. So they're going to be paid over 75 years, but that's how much has been incurred at that point in time. That's how much that legislation.
Now, $700 million a year is the
I was gonna
estimate
say.
of how much it costs. What Sheila's talking about is, okay, on this date, you had these many people who are now eligible. We can expect these people to live X number of years.
Projected.
So over those number of years, this is how much unfunded liability there is.
Right, it's projected over time, because we only had a $9 trillion deficit, I forget, when Bush left the White House, right?
I'm sorry? Well, that was the 17 trillion. That doesn't include the Social Security and Medicare number. So when he left office, the number, he started in office, so now I can pick on the conservatives, Republicans. He started in office, the unfunded liability, the true debt, was $20 trillion.
Yes, and the official was, I think, 5.7 trillion was the number.
When he left, you're saying it was 9 trillion was the official number, and the true number was 50 or 60 trillion dollars. And this one piece of legislation added 8 trillion to that number. Now, if you go back to this question, do you want to provide our seniors with prescription drugs? They need it. Okay? Oh, and by the way, if we do that, I need a check from each and every one of you for $25,000. That's a totally different question that you get. The balanced budget requirement, and the reason this balanced budget, again, is to hold these elected officials accountable. We'll use Wisconsin as a good example. So in Wisconsin, remember the rioting in the streets at Madison? Okay. They have a CPA caucus of Republicans in Wisconsin. They ran across our website, understood that we're proposing the type of budgeting that they wanted to propose. So they called me up during the rioting. It was fun to get into the State House with thousands of rioters. You had to have people escort you in. So we got in, I'm going to digress because it's kind of a fun story. We got into the State House after going through all these hordes of people. One of the staffers had to escort us in. And then we had a meeting or two, and then we had a break. So I said, well, let's go out and have lunch. And the gentleman with me was like, well, are we going to be able to get back in? So I said, well, okay, I'll go to so we went to the security guards and we said, what do we need to do to get back in? And step 1, step 2, step 3. We come back an hour and a half later, we're like, okay, we're ready to do this. Oh no, they have changed the steps. And we cannot get back in. So we had to try to find a staffer of one of the people we were meeting with to come out and get us. So again, we had to stand there and get, anyway, so back to how did Wisconsin get there? So I was in the meeting with these gentlemen and I explained truth in accounting, and here's what we want to do and here's how we want to do it. And then I got done and they said, well, we have a $300 million hole here. Do you think it's larger? And I think they're Republicans, so if the number was larger, they would be able to cut more government, which is what they like to do. And I said, honestly, guys, you do your budgeting pretty well up here. You don't borrow money to pay your bills. You include most of your expenses. You fund your pensions, what you should. The only thing I would have problems with is your retiree health care benefits. You're doing a pay-as-you-go system with those. So I may be able to add $50 million to that number. So 350. And they were disappointed in me. They wanted a higher number, but I had that truth thing behind me, so I could not give them a higher number. But honestly, the whole time I'm sitting there with them, I'm like, this writing in the street is for a $300 million, 300 billion. Am I using the millions and the billions right? 300 million, thank you. You get trillions, millions, right? A $300 million deficit? That's a freaking rounding error in Illinois, okay? We run deficits. Last year's financial statement showed a deficit of $2 trillion. The year before that showed a $5 trillion. The year before that showed a $10 trillion. Sorry, millions, billions. Okay? So the question is, why did they have writing in the streets in Madison, but not in Springfield? And it's because they do use good accounting. So as their government grew, they had to raise taxes. And as it got higher, they had to raise taxes. And finally, the taxpayers said, hold it, excuse me? Why are we paying so much in taxes? Like, well, that's how much your government costs. Well, how come my government costs this much? Well, one big driver is the pensions. Well, hold on. I don't have a pension. What do you mean state employees get a pension? Yeah, they get a pension. How do they get a pension? Well, because it's in their contract. How is it in their contract? Well, because they have collective bargaining. And that's what brought on the rioting in the streets. And I don't care whether you have collective bargaining or not, but the citizens of Wisconsin were able to make that decision. Do we want to have this much cost, which may be a result of these things, because they truly balance their budget? But because we don't, nobody holds our elected officials accountable. Here in Elgin, you have not been paying enough in taxes to fund these pensions. So therefore, have you ever paid attention to them? But if you had to pay more, you might start paying attention to them. So you need to have this good accounting. So as I said, I would urge you here in Elgin to focus on these pensions with your elected officials. Let's go on to what else you can do. Next slide. Okay, yeah. Just educate yourself. We have two websites, truthinaccounting.org and statedatalab.org. Our State Data Lab website is a great website. It allows you to, unfortunately, we don't have it for cities. We only have it for states. If somebody wants to give us lots of money, we'll do it for cities. But for states, you can go in there, you can select the states that you want to look at, and then you can compare 100 data points. So, okay, how is Illinois doing compared to Wisconsin? And you can pull up, okay, how is Illinois doing to Texas? You can pull up whatever states, and then you can, this is great, reporters love this, you can instantly create a chart. It has 100 data points, economic, demographic, and financial data points. So if you want the unemployment rate for different states, it has the unemployment rate. It has the pupils to teachers ratio, how much you're spending on education. So it's a great website.
Isn't Illinois the worst in the nation? I think it's one of them.
What we do is, they are, in our study, they're second worst. Connecticut does beat us out because they have fewer taxpayers, and remember, we do it based on how many taxpayers you have. So our current number is 43,000 for taxpayer. Connecticut is 49,000 because they offer a lot of health care benefits. And once, like here in Illinois, when a teacher retires, their pension is not part of that school district isn't responsible for it, it's the state. In Connecticut, when a government employee retires, even if he works in a little village or city, the health care benefits become a responsibility of the state. So they have thousands of people on that. The next thing you can do, and this is next slide, is to demand what we call fact-based budgeting, which again is just what I was talking about. It's a business model. One thing it would do is, I don't know if you have studied the city budget, and if you have, I feel bad for you. But one thing that this would require is before you pass a budget, which is usually pages, then they have funds this way that go over here, and then they have the general fund, and then they have this fund, and it's like this thick, and you can't understand it. It's like, okay. Before you pass that, go ahead and do me corporate statements. Do a pro forma balance sheet. If this budget passes, what is our balance sheet going to look like? What bills, what unfunded liabilities are we going to add? And what is our income statement going to look like? Are we going to show a positive number or not show a positive number? And then do what Julie did, thank you Julie, which is just acquire, speaking engagements for me, your Rotary, I never spoke before PTA, but any other organizations that you're a part of. If I talk about the federal situation, I have 300 million people to educate. So Julie, thank you for letting check off a few more people. And I would love to do that more. And let's see. And then the last thing is the slide. I think that is, and that's what I mentioned. And then the most important thing is the last slide, which is just to demand the truth. So that is my presentation. Do you want me to do questions? Jim has
Well, the
a hand.
fallacy of it is that the people want the services they're getting, and they're not going to settle for less. So.
If I had to pay for them, I would. I might.
I don't know.
I might.
We're starting to pay for everything in Elgin now.
Right. If I had to pay for them, I might. So for example, if you accounted for that $10 million, okay, your financial position dropped by $10 million in 1 year. If you had to come up with that $10 million, the taxpayers had to all of a sudden, now your taxes increased by $10 million, I think people might be a little bit upset.
I don't know. There's something in Elgin that only allows them to raise taxes a certain percentage. I forget what it is.
It's that's again the state.
That's a tax.
Yeah, where the state is telling you what you can do, which is a great
It's
idea.
constitute municipalities by statute, so most of the time, there's very limited things actually that a city can do that is not being required to change. For instance, all the pensions are controlled at the state level. They really don't have control over that. You couldn't do, which I was disappointed as I tried to learn, become educated in this, that you can't control your own pension investment.
Right.
Because you don't have control of it. So you could never go from a defined contribution or a defined benefit plan to a defined contribution plan like a 401k, which would probably stop the runaway train. And what I was going to ask you is on that $50 million, I don't know if we have this because it's more of a financial question, but did you ever catch that? Is that a runaway train? I mean, how many taxes? You said $1,400 per person is really what you would have to do
Just to catch up.
for how long?
That would be a one-time catch-up.
Okay.
That's
That
only one
would
time
be a
catch-up.
one-time determinant.
Yeah.
For all households, just households, not tax-paying households? I mean, I don't know how many.
No, I calculate, I don't know how many
You just go
taxpayers, I
house.
don't know how many tax homes.
Okay.
How much, what is your property tax levy on there? On the flip side? How much?
Side?
Yeah. How much is that? There's a little baby graph.
Oh, down there.
Yeah, how much is your tax levy? So, your tax levy is 40 million. So in order to fund the 10 million, you would have to raise
25%.
So, you go to the Elgin taxpayers in 1 year and say, I need to raise your taxes by 25%. I think, and then when election time comes, people might go, oh, do I want people that I need to have taxes raised by that much, or do I not want people to have taxes raised that much?
And so your point, that really started, I mean, even 2007, we were at 69 million in unfunded liabilities. We were already, it doesn't really matter whatever council get elected, it really doesn't matter.
Yeah, and I could not, and my staff worked on it this afternoon, we could not figure out why it would be going up. Because again, you're supposed to be paying it down. So why would these pensions?
Is it based on loans and there's interest piling up?
The interest would be included, how much they contribute each year would include that interest payment.
So they just contributed $2 million additional
Yeah.
to the plan this year.
And see, that's one thing that you could do as a village, and I don't, because of your property tax cap, I don't know how. Oh, but one thing they didn't do is they contributed $2 million extra into the pension, quote, extra. But they shorted the, they didn't put any money into the OPEB plan. So.
What's that?
Oh, I'm sorry, their retiree health care plan. So.
Oh, so they put it in one place but didn't put it here.
Right, they do their retiree health care plan as a pay-as-you-go system. So what they say is, okay, I have an employee, they work in the city, they're on the health care plan. So Steve is, I hate to say you're a city employee, I know you don't want to do that. Steve is a city employee.
I'd be retired by now.
Well, that's true. So you're a city employee. Next year, you're going to retire. Now I lost my train of thought. Let's see where I was going.
You were talking about the pay-as-you-go.
Oh, thank you. So, then next year you retire, so your health care plan doesn't change. You just stay on the city's plan, okay? But what happens is, when Steve retires next year, and somebody has to pay for his health insurance or his health benefits, they're not getting any benefits from Steve's work. Steve worked the prior year and he's worked the last 20 years. So why as a taxpayer should, this year, I'm not getting any money for him. Why should I have to pay taxes to pay his benefits? And that's what's going on with the Social Security, the pensions also.
Yeah, it is kind of a note, when people do talk about taxes in the city of Elgin and adding new programs, city council, city staff will say, well, it's only this amount of money per household. For example, the $10 million that you cited, we have, as I recall, 30,000 tax-paying properties in the city of Elgin. So maybe you remember this one, but if it's $10 million divided by, I don't have a calculator, that's $333 per family to raise $10 million. And things just seem to be dismissed. It's like, well, this is only this much. This is only, and they never want to seem to look at the aggregate increase. They'll say, well, this program only costs this much. Are you cruel-hearted? Do you hate the arts? Are you whatever? But they do this all over the place and always minimize it. As to the individual costs, refusing, as a general rule, to look at how many of these things you've added up together that you're introducing as you
Yeah, and that's what I was talking about. That's another gimmick, I guess, or tricks. If we're doing trick or treat, another trick that they do is that they isolate things. And so they'll isolate the general fund, okay? And we're only going to budget the general fund. And we're only going to let the public know about this general fund, forgetting all these other little funds that are going on. And forgetting, so yeah, and so what we do is, honestly, I don't read budgets because they're all political tricks. I was going to say something else, I'm going to say tricks. Yeah, I don't read them, I read their financial statements. I don't read a budget because it's just tricks. And they're just shuffling money around.
But even as a layman, I'm an electrical engineer, not an accountant. The city produces a document this big that if you know somebody, you can get. They used to hand them out to everybody in paper. But if you look at it, it shows, for example, they show the surplus. And the surplus it was on the order of like $7 million 2 years ago, and then now it's like 10 million. It's going up. But city staff.
So then the question is, why should I not have these programs? I have a surplus.
Well, no, here's what's crazy. If you criticize the city for carrying a surplus, i.e. taking more money than they're spending, because they're telling us it's a surplus, so we don't know any different, they turn around and say, oh, but you don't understand, this surplus isn't going to stay. And they show a series of projections going out 5 years. Suddenly, after reaching like $12 million after 5 years of budgetary plan, suddenly the surplus goes to $30,000. And they say, what are you worried about the surplus for? We're going to make it go away anyway. So if you do complain about numbers that they provide, they just created some fiction to show the surplus is going to go away anyway, but it won't. But they're telling you, oh, well, don't worry, 5 years from now it will go away.
The equivalent of the surplus is saying that Jim has $30,000 in his pocket, okay? And so he's going around, I have $30,000, okay? But in his back pocket is his credit cards. And his credit cards show that he owes $100,000. And that's, they don't have this surplus. They might have this cash right now, but you know, if they want to do anything with that surplus, I'm $50 billion in the hole. My unfunded pensions, I don't have the numbers, you have them in front of you. My unfunded pensions are X amount. If you have a surplus, I know where you can put it. We're 50 million in the
Where
hole.
do you think it's all going to lead to? It's very unlikely that you change politicians. So, did you just all go bankrupt? Or?
We're studying Detroit, we're studying Stockton. What happened in either Stockton or San Bernardino, one thing that's going to happen is at some point in time, the pension plans are going to run out of money. Okay, they're not going to have the benefit. You have 43 cents for every, okay, so sometime they're going to run out of money. And Detroit is going to be a very interesting test case because they don't have the money to pay their pensions, they don't have the money to pay their bonds, they don't have the money to pay their other vendors.
Or fire department, or police.
So who?
Didn't they just give $300 million though? For what? Do you know what that was?
No.
The government did? They just gave them $300 million.
So who is going to get cut? Because I can't write a check to everybody. And they're taking it to court, and it will be earth-shattering. Because are they going to just tell the bondholders, forget you, and then, okay, if that's the case in Detroit, that means that would be the case everywhere, so then why would I buy local government bonds or state bonds? Okay. Or they're going to tell the pensioners, you can't get the pensions that you were, quote, guaranteed, you were promised. That will cause shock waves through the system. All these pensioners think that they are guaranteed these benefits.
Well, we're not even guaranteed Social Security.
Right.
Read the Social Security statement. They clearly say that there is no obligation of the federal government to pay Social Security.
No,
That's true. There's a court case that says that. The government does not have the obligation to pay your Social Security. If they want to end Social Security tomorrow, they can do it.
yes. And that is why I've testified before the federal government accounting, cut me off if you want to.
No, go ahead.
Okay, I've testified before the federal
One more
government accounting standards advisory board. They set accounting standards for the federal government. We fought to have Social Security and Medicare recorded as a liability. People, at this point in time, they may be able to change the law, but at this point in time, these are the benefits that people are told they're going to get, so it should be recorded as a liability. If they change the law tomorrow, then reduce the liability, but record a liability. The chief actuary of Social Security testified after me, and we have a court case where somebody was deported. He had become vested in Social Security, so he was owed Social Security benefits. But because they took that one person's benefits away, Congress passed a law, said so we shouldn't have to record it as a liability. We can change the law at any point in time, so it is not a liability.
Yeah.
He said, don't record it on the balance sheet because the number is so big it would scare the American public. Okay. Don't record it as a liability because it would dwarf everything else on the balance sheet. Well, yeah, this huge liability dwarfs. So finally, one of the board members asked him, he said, in essence, so what Mr. Gosh you're saying, Chief Actuary of Social Security, is nobody owes any Social Security or Medicare benefits beyond the checks that are currently written? He said that is absolutely correct.
That is the law.
That is the law. That's why they don't report it
Yeah.
in the $17 trillion.
They could end it tomorrow.
They could end it tomorrow.
We'll take one more question.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
About Elgin again, looking back over a period of 5 years up to the year 2011, Elgin on average ended with their accounting as they presented, whatever trickery they used, their average closing balance was something like $200,000.
Do I have $200,000?
Well, a couple of years they ran deficits, $600,000.
Just in the general fund alone. It's a general.
In the general fund. They showed these mild.
I have $200,000. I'm showing it to you.
Yeah. Okay, so they said that this is what they had, but then they said we have to establish this $7 million surplus, which they did in 2012, which they then made into $10 million for this year's budget. But they said we can't operate the way we were, even though I don't know why they couldn't, but they said we have to have this surplus of 7 and then 10 million, and then it said it's going to go to 12 in a couple more years and then go to 32,000.
What are they going to use it for?
Well, they said we need this for working capital to solve cash flow issues. And because I know nothing about accounting, and I have to take this at the mercy, I'm at the mercy of the man who's getting paid $192,000 a year to make everybody feel happy and keep his expensive job. I don't
With
know.
benefits.
With
And
benefits,
benefits,
it's beyond that, yes. Oh, I don't understand, it is, even in the common parlance of however smoke and mirrors cities use, is it standard to say you need a big cash buffer for paying daily bills? When we went, at least the 5 years that I got the histories before, we didn't do that. Is any of that related to all of our indebtedness or indebtedness?
What you'd have to ask them for is what is this going, they say working capital, what does that mean? What is working capital now?
Our daily bills, so we aren't starved for cash. And I was
Then
like,
then I would come back to them and say, well, no, hold it, each year, not a cumulative. The state law says each year you need to balance your budget. Okay, so theoretically.
No rainy day
No,
fund?
no, each year you have to balance your budget. So therefore,
the surplus is against the rules.
Surplus would be against the rules, and they're saying we need this working capital to pay for future deficits. You shouldn't have future
Yeah,
deficits.
but they're saying they need it for day-to-day operations.
And that would be future deficits.
Oh.
They're planning on running deficits,
So
okay?
is that hogwash, is that a line of hogwash we're getting with that statement of why we need $10 million?
It would depend on why they need the money. And I would contend that, let's just say that they are looking in the future and their actuaries have said, our contributions are going to go up in our pension funds. So we're going to need money to pay those contributions.
Yeah, but they don't rationalize it as that to the public.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I would ask them specifically, what are you, it's not, what do you mean by daily bills? Is it water? If it's just daily operating bills, then they're not meeting the balanced budget requirement, okay? If it's for pensions, then they might be meeting the daily, they may be, then I would say it's a good thing. But what I would say is, why don't you just put it into the pension fund immediately so it can start earning this 7.275% interest?
Okay.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to thank you.